Let's take a moment and give Andy, Sandy, and Don a wonderful hand, because if you're not doing this in 10 years, you may not be doing anything. All right, so let's give them a hand for this call to action. And if you think you're going to get out of this just by sitting with me on the stage talking, you're wrong. All right, so this is going to require some interaction. That's why this thing is up here. This odyssey started for me about a year ago. So I was at Georgia Pacific, focused on technology. And I met with my boss in January, like I always do. And he says, Mike, I'm really happy with the technology stuff we're doing. Thank you, Wes. I appreciate that you like what we're doing, was my reply. And then he said, but I'm not very happy with how we're going about manufacturing and operational innovation. We seem to be doing things the same way for the last 70 years. And I thought about that. So the more I thought about it, the more I realized that what he was asking us to do was not really a technology bet. It was a bet on us. All right, so just to give you a little background why he asked me to do that. See if I can figure this thing out. How many of you know a knock'em stiffer? Would you know one if you've seen one? Anybody? Scott, do you know knock'em stiffer? I am. So I wonder what that means. All right, that means, if I can get it to go. All right, I assume forward means forward, right? So here we go. So knock'em stiff is where I grew up. And it really is a place. All right, I grew up on a farm, and that's where it is in Ohio. And that sign might be the prettiest thing in knock'em stiff. All right? So if I can get it to go on to the next one. I don't know why this thing's not working, guys. There we go. So that's the most popular picture on the internet of a home in knock'em stiff. All right? And you're all sitting there, what's this got to do with innovation? All right? And I'll show you. Come on. So what you see is a guy who's a direct result of my past decisions. The school that I went to, my class, had roughly 60 individuals. 30 of those individuals were male. By age 40, nearly half of those individuals are dead. So think about that. Rural Ohio, by age 40, half of those individuals are dead. The reasons they're dead are combinations of alcohol, firearms, automobiles, drugs. Now, if any one of those single things were the cause, I'd be dead, right? But I'm not. The fact that half of my classmates are dead has everything to do with the decisions you make, and most likely that I am living proof that we're all better off lucky than good. All right? Come on. So, because it requires you to make a decision, innovation, all right, you're going to have to participate. So the question is, looks like he's going to give me something that actually might work. This one here, I think the battery's died. Which one do I push here? All right, how many people in here can draw? Raise your hand. All right. Not quite half of you. All right, how many people in here can sing? Scott, I'm glad you raised your hand. All right, so less than half of you can draw and almost none of you can sing. All right? So if I go ask a kindergarten class that same question, every kid raises their hand, right? And you were all once kindergartners. What happened to you? Do you ever wonder that the reason innovation is so hard, right, is that in large organization is because what do? What we do as humans, all right, and this is why innovation is hard. What we do as humans is that we create most of our own obstacles by the limitations we draw on ourselves, right? And it's only human nature that we do that. So I made this up. I didn't know a better way to say it, is you need to be inquisitive, right? Never break the first law of imagination. The first law of imagination, don't let what you know be the enemy of what you're about to learn. And we're all successful professionals. We get paid for what we know, all right? But you can't let that get in the way of what you're about to go do or what you need to go do. Everything that we need to do to be successful in what you heard Andy, Sandy, and Don talk about. Sounds like a band, doesn't it? Andy, Sandy, and Don. That's a pretty good order, Andy. Everything you heard them to do, or heard them say that we need to go do is right. But in order to make this work, we can't violate the first law of imagination. All right? Don't let what you know become the enemy of what you're about to learn. All right? So, in Knock 'em Stiff, Peepaw was my grandfather. And when Peepaw talked, you could either listen or you could feel. All right? Now, how many people know exactly what that means? When Grandpa says you can either listen or you can feel, you need to pay particular attention here. All right? So your future actually depends on how you answered those two questions I asked. Because if you don't have the willingness to raise your hand, the risk in a group of raising your hand and being selected to come up here and draw something on the board that may be really ugly, all right, or to stand and sing in front of a crowd when maybe you don't sing well, but you can certainly sing and you can certainly draw, that is so small compared to the risk that you undertake inside your own company every day when you look at these kinds of things. It's indescribably small. So, now we know where the problem is. Scott, did we have a picture of where the problem is? All right, so the problem's us. It's me too. All right, and so now that we know, you can switch back. Hopefully this thing will continue to work. Now that we know, what are we going to do? All right, one of the things we can do is, I don't want to do any of this stuff. All right, it's hard. So the first thing we do is what? Kill it dead in its tracks, and that's what DIT stands for in Knock 'em Stiff, is that you kill things dead in their tracks, and that means you've done it. All right? So let's go through a simple scenario that we all face inside our own companies. You come and you sit down in front of somebody and you pitch something to them, and the first thing they say is, been there, done that, that doesn't work. How many folks in here have actually heard that said to them? Everybody, right? So more people have heard that than can actually draw. All right? Wow. So that scenario right there, and this is going to sound rough, but it needs to be rough. Anytime that somebody says that to you, move on. The energy that you spend to try and convince that person they're wrong isn't worth the time. All right? What you want them to say, and what we hope we coach people to say, is that in order for us to want to do that, this, and this would have to be true. Or some positive spin on it. Understand what you want to happen, and don't say that can't be done. Because the person who says that can't be done is violating the first law of imagination. Don't let what you know become the enemy of what you're about to learn. So also beware of the null decision. All right, and here's a great little tool I'm going to give you. The null decision, and we all go to these kinds of meetings where we come to discuss something and nobody decides anything. So the tool I'm going to give you is at the end of the meeting, say amen, real loud. So that everybody hears you. And then they're going to look at you and say, well, what do you mean by amen? Well, in Knock'em where I grew up, at the end of every prayer, you say amen. And when you come to a null decision, nobody decides to do anything, it's the same as if you made a prayer. All right? So you need to say amen. So here's another way to kill innovation dead in its tracks. Because if you don't celebrate your failures, you will kill it dead in its tracks. Because innovation, hey, I get to use this. It's not just a prop. Because innovation, you start here and you go one direction, right? And then you go another, and then you guess what? You fail. And then you go another direction. All right? Every time you fail, you learn something. And by celebrating your failures, you celebrate that you learn something. All right? And when your organization understands that you're going to celebrate the effort that went into it, then they understand that if I get it wrong, doesn't mean I'm fired. All right? So, what if we want to do this right? And this is a real high-level way of thinking about, and this is the way we do things at GP. All right? A high-level way of thinking about how we do this. There's two words that by themselves are pretty powerful. They're what and if. But when you put those two words together, all of a sudden, your imagination becomes more powerful. What if? All right? So, what would have to be true for us to want to go do this? That's the first thing you ask yourself. All right? The next thing is, if I understand the causalities of those truths, in a way, what you're saying is, can I control those causalities? All right? Can I affect them? Yes or no? If you say yes, then you have a chance to go to create some real value. If you say no, I'm going to suggest you take your money and go to Vegas. Because now you're making a bet. And that bet is that you're now going to take something and put money on something you can't control. And that's just like playing the slots or the roulette table or anything else at Vegas, right? And so when you think about making that bet, and that's the way we talk about innovation at GP, we call it a bet, all right? It can be a wasteland of horrors because you are taking a risk. And as you're taking that risk, beware of optimism bias. Now, optimism bias, and I don't mean to offend anybody that smokes, but optimism bias is the same reason that folks that smoke believe that cancer is not going to happen to them. It's the same reason that us that ride motorcycles, in Knock'em you say sickles, all right? That we believe that just because our odds are 10 times higher of being in an accident because I'm riding a motorcycle doesn't mean it's going to happen to me. When in fact you are a part of the odds. That's what optimism bias is to believe because you're involved, the outcome is going to be different. Understand that there is going to be some degree of fortune. If you've read Malcolm Gladwell's book, Outliers, timing is the key. Have the right skills in the right place, and always practice humility. This one's important. Just because you know the causalities of those truths and you can control them doesn't mean you want to go do it. If you don't understand that you create a clear advantage and what you will do to create that, then don't do it. Just because you can make money at it doesn't mean you want to go do it. The other thing is that remember that companies are societies unto themselves. They have shared beliefs and values, and that innovation is not just, do I have the capability, do I have the resources, right? It reorders the society, your company, that it's in, and it infects it. That's one of the reasons that you heard Don say that innovation in large organizations is really hard. The reason it's really hard is because we all understand that anytime we do innovation, it's going to affect me, and it may have an outcome that I can't control or I can't predict. So in a little bit of time I have left, I want to leave you with a few things. And I'm a big fan of the art of war. And every battle is won before it is fought. So from 30 years of doing this, this is kind of the innovator's creed that I want to leave you with. The most rewarding innovations are preceded by a trip through a wilderness of anxiety because you don't know the outcome. And you don't know the outcome because along the way you have to learn your way to the result. You don't know exactly where it's going to take you, and that creates a little bit of anxiety, sometimes a lot of anxiety because you feel alone. And yesterday I heard Michael say this very thing. The people that are on the bus count for more than where they're sat. Get the right people on the bus. All right. There we go. Here's another one that we seldom talk about. The people you go into the wilderness with are rarely the same people you pal around with. And if you ever want to get to know somebody, your friends or whoever, wait till the pressure's really on and you'll see what people are made of. All right? These people here that go into the wilderness are the same guys that'll carry a gas can to Hades with you. Or gals. So let's go through a simple thought exercise, and this is more of a story than a thought exercise. A long time ago, several lifetimes ago, I was fortunate enough to coach basketball. And I got to spend some time with a fellow that coached the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. And his name is Jerry Tarkanian. And so I heard him tell this story one time. And he said, you know, for the longest time in the 80s and 90s, it became really popular that you wanted your kids, which is what he called his players, you wanted your kids to relax before the games. So they started practicing this. They played all kind of soothing, relaxing music, and this is before everybody had iPods and stuff, and they played it in the locker room, and their success rate went down. So he wondered why, and then it dawned on him one day. He said, if you're at home and somebody calls you on the phone and you pick up the phone and they say, stay right there, I'm going to come over to your house in 15 minutes, I'm going to kick your hind end. Is the first thing you do is put on a record? Or do you just get ready, right? So as you think about the right people on the bus and the people you pal around with, right, and the people you want to go into the wilderness with, think about that, right? The people you want to work with are the people that get ready and get focused. I promise you, as Don said, I promise you, this stuff will be hard. There will be stress. You will wish you hadn't started it. But at the end, you will never be the same. And think about all the innovations you've been involved in, right? Every one of them, you never come out the other side the same person. All right? So, innovators are to the status quo, and the status quo is our companies. Our companies are built to maintain the status quo, right? They are to the status quo as jet airplanes are to paper airplanes, and you need to treat innovators that way. They're not the same animals, all right? Because all organizations are bureaucracies, and they're built to thrive on the status quo. Well, there we go. Thank you. So let's talk about some examples. This, as I said, this odyssey started a little over a year ago for me, and I involved Andy and Paul in my dilemma. And we are going to transform our organization, not exactly like Sandy and Don discussed, but real similar. And so to get our minds wrapped around the kind of transformation that's hard for us to envision, I'm going to tell you a little historical story that is both incremental, it's disruptive, and transformative. So this historical story starts in 1700. And the UK, Britain, had a population of about 5 million people. Those 5 million people had a life expectancy that wasn't long. Also at the same time, there was an East India Trading Company. That East India Trading Company started bringing tea into Britain. All right? As they brought tea into Britain, people began to get addicted to tea, all right, because of the caffeine involved and the feeling you get, not because caffeine is a stimulant, but because of how it affects your body. And so people started drinking more and more and more and more tea. That effect was, by 1850, there were 17 million people living in Britain. So 150 years later, the population more than triples. And the fact that this is how little things change over time, the fact that the East India Trading Company brought tea in, that folks drank tea, that they had to boil the water they used to drink tea, changed the mortality rate in Great Britain to the fact that they now had enough population for the Industrial Revolution to happen. So the little things that seem incremental, all right, actually become transformative. And as you folks think about how you want to transform this stuff, and what Andy and Sandy and Don, that's easy to remember. And as what they say, think about what they're asking us to do. Because in the future, that decision is going to come to you. And please don't let anybody say amen at the end of this for your companies. Just remember that, in this picture again, we're probably all a little bit knock 'em stiffer, because I went to GP and I became a student of MBM, and what I didn't understand was that growing up on a farm in Ohio, in Knock'em-Stiff, Ohio, I actually practiced MBM every day and didn't know it even had a name. It comes down to a lot of common sense, and fortune favors the prepared mind, I think is the actual quote, isn't it, Scott? So, thank you for your attention, and I appreciate your time.